The fog came off the bay that morning the way it always did in late October, slow and low, dragging itself across the water like something that didn't want to be seen. I was standing at the kitchen window with my coffee going cold in my hand, watching it swallow the eucalyptus trees at the far edge of the garden, and I remember thinking that the day felt wrong before it had even properly started. Not wrong the way a storm feels wrong with a pressure you can measure. Wrong the way a room feels wrong when something has been moved while you were sleeping and you can't tell yet what it was. Liam was still asleep upstairs. He was 3, and 3-year-olds sleep like the world owes them rest, arms thrown wide, mouth slightly open, one sock on and one somewhere lost in the sheets. I'd already checked on him twice that morning for no reason I could have explained, except that I needed to look at something uncomplicated. His face when he slept was the most uncomplicated thing I knew. We were staying in the house Garrett had grown up in. That was always the phrase his family used, the house Garrett grew up in, spoken with a reverence that made it sound less like a building and more like a character in a story they all shared and I'd been allowed to read only secondhand. It sat on a quiet, fog-narrowed street in Sausalito, just north of the bridge, 3 stories of pale blue Victorian with white trim and a garden his mother, Renata, maintained with the focused precision of someone who had decided long ago that flowers were the one domain in her life she could fully govern. The house smelled like cedar and old wool rugs and something floral I had tried for 7 years to identify and never could. I had spent 40 or 50 nights inside it over the course of my marriage, and I had never once felt fully at ease in any room of it. My name is Presley Kane. I was 34 years old that October, and I had spent the better part of those 34 years learning how to be the kind of woman who did not take up too much space. I grew up in Bakersfield, the daughter of a woman who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry and a father who left when I was 9 and sent birthday cards with cash folded inside until I turned 12 and then stopped entirely, no explanation, no final card. I put myself through 2 years of community college on evenings and weekends and transferred to UC Davis on a partial scholarship and more financial aid than I have ever told anyone the exact figure of, and I graduated with a degree in environmental planning that I used for a while before Liam was born and the quiet arithmetic of our household rearranged itself the way it rearranges itself for most women. Without a meeting, without a vote, without anyone announcing that a decision had been made. Garrett was an architect. He was genuinely good at it, not good the way people say when they mean someone has simply avoided catastrophe, but good in a way that showed up in the work, in the proportion of things, the way his buildings related to their sites, the way light moved through them at different hours. He had a firm in the Mission District with 2 partners and the firm was doing well, and we lived in a rented house in No Valley that cost more than it should have but had east-facing windows that filled the kitchen with morning light and a park 2 blocks away where Liam could run himself completely empty in the afternoons. Our life, looked at from the outside, had the appearance of being more than adequate. It had the appearance of being, in fact, the kind of life people describe when they say someone has everything. What I had, more specifically, was a husband who loved me the way some men love the women they've chosen, thoroughly, and with a complete absence of curiosity about who those women were outside of the choosing. The gathering that weekend was Renata's idea. She called it a family weekend, a phrase she used every fall, which in practice meant that Garrett's parents, his sister Cordelia and her husband Marcus, Garrett's uncle Philip, and Garrett and Liam and I would all stay in the Sausalito house for 2 nights, eating Renata's food, talking about the things that families like this talked about when they were performing closeness for one another. I had been to enough of these weekends to know the shape of them precisely. I knew which chairs were claimed by which people without anyone saying so. I knew that Douglas, Garrett's father, would steer most conversations back to himself within 4 exchanges, not out of cruelty but out of a lifelong habit of being the most interesting person in any room he'd ever entered. I knew that Cordelia would find at some point during the weekend an occasion to summarize one of my opinions back to me in a slightly improved version, as though my original phrasing had been a rough draft she was being generous enough to quietly edit. And I knew that Renata would ask twice if I needed help in the kitchen and then come in anyway the second time and rearrange something I was actively using. I knew all of this going in. I had promised myself on the drive up, with the bay glittering and Liam asleep in his car seat behind me, that I would not let the small erosions accumulate into something I couldn't hold. 2 nights. I had done harder things than 2 nights. The fog was still thick when I heard Liam stirring in the room upstairs, and I poured the cold coffee down the sink and went to get him. The morning passed the way Saturday mornings in that house always passed, with a surface pleasantness that was not exactly false but was not exactly natural either, the way a photograph of a family is not false but is not quite the same as the family. Renata made a large breakfast and accepted compliments about it with a smile that was gracious and a little proprietary. Douglas read something on his phone and made occasional remarks about it to the room at large. Cordelia and Marcus arrived mid-morning from where they'd been staying at a hotel down the hill. They never stayed in the house itself. I had never been told why, and Cordelia came in with 2 bottles of wine she'd brought from a Sonoma producer she described as very small, very serious, and set them on the counter with the manner of someone making a contribution that would be remembered. Liam played on the sitting room floor with a set of wooden blocks he'd brought from home, and occasionally Garrett's father crouched down to look at what he was building and called him Buddy. And Liam accepted this without comment, the way small children accept all adult attention, as something that occasionally happens in their peripheral vision. I helped Renata with lunch and did not say anything when she redistributed the items on the cutting board. I ate lunch and answered questions about the weather in the city, and about a neighborhood restaurant Cordelia had read about and wanted to know if we'd been to. I was present. I was composed. I was the version of myself I maintained in that house, smaller, quieter, taking up the precise amount of space I had been implicitly allocated. It was at dinner that it began. The table was laid with the chandelier casting its warm, slightly theatrical light across the white cloth, and Renata had made something slow-braised that filled the house with a good smell, and there were candles, because there were always candles when the family was together, and we sat down, all 7 of us plus Liam in the booster seat between Garrett and me, and for a while it was simply dinner. Douglas was telling a story about a development project in Marin that a colleague of his was involved in. He told it with the particular fluency of a man who had been telling stories at dinner tables for 40 years and understood instinctively where to pause, where to modulate, where to land a punchline. The table was oriented toward him. Even Marcus, who had no professional connection to real estate or development, was leaning forward slightly, the way people lean forward when they've learned that leaning forward is the appropriate response to this man's stories. I was cutting Liam's chicken into pieces small enough to be safe and listening with half my attention and watching the candle nearest to me bend in some draft that came from nowhere. Then Cordelia spoke. She said it lightly, with the tone she used for remarks she was framing as observations rather than judgments, conversational, almost throwaway, the way you might mention you'd noticed a loose thread on someone's sleeve. She was talking about a mutual friend of hers and Garrett's, a woman named Bree who had recently gone back to work after her second child, and Cordelia tilted her wine glass and said, "I just think it takes a particular kind of personality to prioritize a career over being genuinely present for your children. Not a judgment. I'm not judging anyone. Just an observation." She looked at me when she said it. Not at Garrett. Not at Renata or Marcus. At me with a look that was perfectly calibrated, interested, almost kind, the look of someone who is simply curious what you think. The table hadn't stopped. Douglas was nodding at something in his own story. Renata was moving a serving dish. Marcus was refilling his water glass. The room had not paused. But Cordelia was looking at me and I was looking at her, and we both understood with complete clarity what the remark had been pointed at. I had been doing consulting work for the past 14 months. Small projects, environmental impact assessments, review work I could break into pieces and fit around Liam's schedule, the kind of work that would never make anyone rich but that I was good at and that kept some part of me from going entirely quiet. I had mentioned it at the previous family weekend, and Renata had smiled and said, "How sweet that you found a little something to keep yourself occupied," and I had not answered that either. "I think it depends entirely on the family," I said. "And the child." My voice was level. I did not look away from Cordelia. "Of course," she said. "Of course it does." She smiled warmly. She took a sip of wine. And Douglas, who had apparently been tracking more of this conversation than his posture suggested, set down his fork with the deliberateness of a man who has decided to clarify something for everyone's benefit. "Presley, nobody at this table has any issue with women who work. We're simply saying, and I think we're all saying this from a place of care, that Liam is at a critical developmental age and Garrett's practice is thriving. There's no financial pressure requiring you to work. It reads as a choice." He said it pleasantly. He said it the way he said most things, from a position so settled in its own authority that the possibility of disagreement hadn't occurred to him, the same way a man at the top of a hill doesn't consider that the hill might slope the other direction. I counted the pause instead of answering it. Then I said, I appreciate that. I've made my choice. Garrett, across the table, said nothing. His jaw was set at the angle it took when he had decided to stay out of something, and I looked at that angle and felt something in my chest tighten by a degree. The dinner moved on. Renata brought out a second dish and accepted more compliments. Marcus made a joke I half heard. Liam asked for more bread, then changed his mind and asked for more chicken, then decided he was done and wanted to get down, and I negotiated him into 5 more bites with the focused patience that is its own kind of work. The conversation drifted. Douglas's Marin project, a trip Cordelia and Marcus were planning to Lisbon, a renovation Douglas and Renata were considering for the back of the house. I spoke when spoken to. I smiled at the intervals that required smiling. I was composed and present and not particularly there. After dinner, once Liam was upstairs asleep in the small room with the window seat, I came back down and found Garrett and Douglas in the sitting room with their voices low and comfortable, and Renata and Cordelia in the kitchen with the door most of the way closed, and I sat in the chair by the window with a book I had been carrying through the weekend as a prop more than anything else and read approximately none of it. Close to 9, Cordelia came out of the kitchen. She had refilled her wine glass and her shoulders had the looseness that meant she had passed the point of calculating. She sat on the arm of the sofa nearest to me and tilted her head slightly, the way she tilted her head when she was about to say something she had decided was generous. I hope you know nobody is trying to make you feel unwelcome, she said. I looked up from the book. I know, I said. She nodded slowly. It's just I want to be honest with you because I think you deserve that. She paused in the way people pause before sentences they've been composing for a while. Garrett told us about the account. The one in your name. The one he didn't know about. My hands went still on the open pages. He mentioned it to Dad a few weeks ago, she continued, her voice careful, almost soft. He was hurt. He didn't say that directly, but you know Garrett. He doesn't say things directly. I could see it. The fire in the grate made a sound. A log settling. I'm not sure what Garrett told you, I said. Just that it existed, she said. That he found out by accident when a statement came in the mail. He'd never seen an account in your name before. She let the sentence sit for a moment. As his sister, I felt like I should say something. Because I love him. She said it with a weight that meant something other than what it said. That's between Garrett and me, I said. Obviously. She smiled. Obviously it is. I went to bed before 10. Garrett came up later, quiet in the dark, and I lay still and heard him move around the room, and he did not speak and I did not speak, and the silence between us in the bed was not the silence of people who are sleeping. It had a shape. It had a temperature. Sunday morning was surface calm in the way that mornings can be calm when everyone in a house has decided, without discussion, to pretend the night before didn't have the texture it had. Renata made a breakfast that was too large and too deliberate not to be a statement of something. Douglas drank his coffee and read. Marcus and Cordelia came back up from the hotel, and Cordelia kissed Renata's cheek and said the coffee smelled wonderful. Liam ate a waffle with total absorption, both hands involved, not looking up, and I found this steadying in a way I could not have explained to anyone. Garrett poured a mug of coffee and handed it to me. I said thank you. Our hands did not touch in the exchange. By afternoon the rain had arrived, real rain, the kind that came off the bay in gray horizontal sheets and made the garden behind the house disappear entirely. There was nowhere to go. There was a fire in the sitting room grate and the room was warm and the 7 of us were in it together in the way people are together when the weather has removed all alternatives. Douglas asked pleasantly about our plans. Were we thinking about buying something rather than continuing to rent? Was the No Valley house working as a long-term arrangement? He asked it the way he asked most things, as a man taking inventory of a situation he considered within his scope of oversight. I said we hadn't made any decisions yet. He said, it might be worth thinking seriously about sooner rather than later. Garrett's earnings give you real options. And if Presley were to step back from the working even partially, he paused. Well, it would simplify the logistics considerably. I said, I'm not planning to step back. Douglas looked at me. Not with hostility. with the particular patient expression of someone who has just heard a thing they expected to hear and is waiting, unhurried, for the correction to come from somewhere. And Cordelia said from the chair nearest the fire, "It's the account that I keep coming back to, honestly. The separate account. If it were Marcus, I would want to understand the thinking." Garrett looked up from his phone. The rain hit the windows in a gust that made the glass shudder slightly. Renata said gently, with the specific texture of gentleness she'd perfected over decades, "Presley, sweetheart, I don't think anyone here is attacking you. We just want to understand." I looked at my husband. He was looking back at me with an expression I had seen twice before in our marriage and told myself both times I was misreading. It was not quite anger. Anger would have been easier. It was something that sat behind anger, the expression of a man who had already made a determination and was waiting, with a kind of exhausted patience, for the situation to catch up to the conclusion he'd reached privately. "Garrett," I said. He set his phone on the armrest. His voice, when it came, was flat and deliberate. "I think we should talk about this. As a family." "As a family?" My voice stayed steady. "I don't think this is a family conversation. Presley." The flatness in his voice had a weight behind it now. "You have an account I didn't know existed. I found out from a piece of mail. I think that warrants an explanation." "I agree," I said. "I'm happy to have that conversation with you." "Not here," Douglas said with the mildness of a man who has never once needed to raise his voice to fill a room. "There's nothing to be embarrassed about, Presley. We just want to understand what the thinking was." "I'm not embarrassed," I said. "Then explain it," Cordelia said. The fire popped. Liam, in the corner with the wooden train set he'd found in the toy chest by the wall, looked up at the sound, blinked at the room and went back to his tracks. The small sound of wheels on wood was the only ordinary thing in the room. I looked at Garrett. I looked at his face, at the set of it, the particular closed quality of it, and something arrived in me with the clarity of cold water poured cleanly into a glass. He had told them. Not in passing. Not by accident. He had sat down with his father and laid out the information and let it be shaped into whatever shape it had taken before landing me in this chair, in this room, with a fire at my back and rain on the windows and every person in the room arrayed on the other side of whatever line had just been drawn. I said, "I opened a savings account with my own consulting income. I'm glad to discuss it with my husband. I won't be discussing it here." Garrett looked at me for a long moment. The fire moved behind Cordelia's shoulder. Renata's hands were folded in her lap with a stillness that meant she was watching everything. And then my husband, the man who had held my hand at my mother's funeral, who had been in the delivery room when Liam came into the world, who had once, on a beach in Big Sur, told me I was the thing in his life he was most certain of, said, in a voice that had gone somewhere entirely flat and final, "Apologize to my family. For the secrecy. Right now. Or pack your bags and leave." The room went very still. The train wheels on the wooden track. Small. Regular. Completely indifferent to what was happening 3 feet away. I looked at Garrett. I didn't fill the silence. He held my gaze, and in his face there was something I would need a long time and a lot of distance to understand, and the firelight moved across his features and for just a moment made him look like someone I had never been introduced to. "Well?" he said. I stood up. Not dramatically. Not with any speed that could be read as flight. I set the book I had been holding on the side table, spine down, the way you set something when you intend to come back to it, and I stood up from the chair and I looked at Garrett for one more second, one full, level second, and then I said, "I'm going to check on Liam." My voice was quiet. It carried. Nobody spoke as I crossed the room. I was aware of all of them, Douglas with his hands loose on his knees, Renata with her folded stillness, Cordelia with the wine glass, Marcus the only one looking somewhere other than at me, and I walked past all of them without hurrying, and I went up the stairs, and I went into the small room where Liam was sleeping in the portable crib we'd brought from home, and I stood in the dark with my hand on the doorframe and breathed. The room smelled like him. Like the specific warmth of a sleeping child, the faint sweetness of the detergent we used on his clothes, the rubber of the sneakers he'd worn all day that were sitting in a neat pair by the wall because I had put them there. I had put them there. I stood in the dark and looked at his small shape in the crib, and I let the room be quiet. Downstairs I could hear, very faintly, the sound of voices resuming. The low register of Douglas's voice. Then Cordelia's, lighter, quicker. I couldn't make out words and I didn't try. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the narrow guest bed in the corner that Garrett and I were sharing, and I put my hands flat on my thighs and I looked at the wall. I stayed up there for 20 minutes. When I came back down, the sitting room had rearranged itself. Marcus was pouring something at the drinks cabinet. Renata had gone to the kitchen. Douglas was standing by the window with his back to the room, looking out at the rain-dark garden. Cordelia was on the sofa with her legs tucked under her, and Garrett was in the armchair nearest the fire, and when I came in he looked up at me and his expression had changed. Not softened. Something else. Settled, maybe. The way a face settles when a person has spent 20 minutes being agreed with. "We should talk," he said. "Yes," I said. "We should." I sat down in the chair across from him, the one I'd been in before, and I folded my hands in my lap. "Not here. Presley." "Not here, Garrett." He looked at me for a moment and then he looked at the fire and I saw the muscles in his jaw move once, twice, the way they moved when he was swallowing something he'd decided not to say. Cordelia said from the sofa, not unkindly, "Nobody is ganging up on you. We're just asking for honesty." I looked at her. My voice stayed steady. "I heard you the first time." She blinked. She looked at Garrett. He did not look back at her. Douglas turned from the window then. He turned slowly, with the unhurried quality of a man who has never needed to rush to be heard, and he looked at me with something that was not quite pity and not quite impatience, something in between, something that had its own specific flavor that I had tasted in small doses across 7 years of sitting in rooms with him and was tasting now at full concentration. "Presley," he said, "I want to say something and I want you to hear it in the spirit it's meant." He paused. He let the pause do work. "Garrett came to me 6 weeks ago. He was struggling. He told me about the account, not the amount, he didn't go into the amount, but the fact of it. The fact that you had done something financially that you hadn't discussed with him. And what he told me was that he felt like a stranger in his own marriage." He paused again. "I thought you should know that. Because whatever you're protecting, it's costing you more than it's worth." The fire shifted. A log cracked and resettled. I looked at Douglas. I looked at him for a long, even moment, and I did not fill the silence he'd left. Then I said, "Thank you for telling me that." He nodded, as though this were the beginning of a concession. It wasn't. I looked at Garrett. "I'd like to go to bed," I said. "We can talk in the morning before we drive back." Garrett's jaw moved again. "Fine," he said. The word came out clipped, with a pressure behind it that had nowhere to go. I said good night to the room. I went upstairs. I lay in the dark for a long time listening to the rain, and when Garrett came up more than an hour later and lay down on his side of the bed without speaking, I was still awake, but I stayed quiet, and eventually the rain slowed, and sometime after that I slept. In the morning he was different. Not in the way I had hoped, which would have been a return to something, to the particular version of him that existed before the weekend, before the room, before as a family. Different in a way that moved in the other direction. Quieter. More careful. The way someone is careful when they have made a decision and are waiting for the right moment to deliver it. He was good with Liam at breakfast. He made him toast and cut it into triangles the way Liam liked, and he sat beside him and listened to the extended and not entirely coherent story Liam told about something that had happened at the park last Tuesday, nodding at the right places, asking questions. Watching him do it, I felt something in my chest that I had no clean name for, something that was grief and fury at the same time, and had the texture of both. We said goodbye to his family in the front hall. Renata hugged me, the particular hug she used with me, one hand between my shoulder blades, brief, correct, and Douglas shook my hand, and Cordelia kissed my cheek and said, "Safe drive," and Marcus, who had barely spoken to me the entire weekend, said it was good to see me and meant it about as much as you mean anything you say in a front hall while pulling on your coat. I buckled Liam into his car seat. Garrett drove. The bridge was clear, the bay visible and flat and gray in the Sunday morning light, and Liam fell asleep before we reached the city, and Garrett drove with both hands on the wheel and did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "I need to understand what the account is for, Presley." "I know," I said. "Because the only reasons I can think of," he stopped. Started again. "The only reasons a person opens a separate account and doesn't tell their spouse are reasons I don't want to be thinking about my own wife." "It's my consulting income," I said. 14 months of it. Organized separately because I wanted something that was mine to manage. "Why?" I looked out the window. The city was coming up, the hills, the density, the way the buildings stacked on each other going up toward Twin Peaks. Because it felt important, I said. To have something I'd built that was accounted for separately. Accounted for. His voice had gone careful in the way it had gone careful in the sitting room, that flatness, that load-bearing quality. That's an interesting way to put it. Garrett. It sounds like you were preparing for something. I wasn't preparing for anything. I was protecting something. He didn't respond to that. He drove and I watched the city, and Liam slept in the back with the particular boneless ease of a 3-year-old who has decided that the vehicle is an appropriate place to be unconscious, and the rest of the drive home was quiet in a way that was not peaceful. That was the first weekend of October. By the third week, the shape of what was happening had become clear enough that I could see it from a distance, the way you can see a weather system from far enough away to understand what it is before it arrives. Garrett was not angry in the ways I knew how to manage. He was not loud. He was not cruel in the explicit sense. He was something that was harder to get purchase on. He was distant in a directed way, present in all the physical requirements of a life and absent from everything else, and the absence was pointed, aimed, a kind of pressure applied through withdrawal. He came home at the times he usually came home. He ate dinner and talked to Liam and answered questions if I asked them, and sometimes initiated conversation about practical things, the lease renewal, an appointment for Liam's checkup, whether we needed to get the car serviced. He did not touch me. Not in the deliberate way of a man withholding something, but in the way of a man who had reclassified me as something that did not require that particular kind of attention, quietly and without announcement. There was a Wednesday night in the second week that I keep returning to. Not because anything significant happened, but because of how completely ordinary it was. We were at the dinner table, the three of us, and Liam was eating pasta with both hands the way he did when no one intervened, and Garrett was describing something about a project meeting, a client who'd changed the specifications on a window detail, a contractor he'd had to manage carefully, and I was listening and I was asking follow-up questions, and on the surface of it we were a family having dinner. But I had been watching Garrett's face across the table all week, and I could see the thing he was doing without knowing he was doing it, the way a person edits their expression when they've decided not to let something show. Every time his eyes came to mine they adjusted fractionally, the way you adjust the angle of a lamp to change what it illuminates. He was still there. He was just looking somewhere slightly to the left of me. I loaded the dishwasher after Liam went to bed and Garrett was in his home office, and I stood at the kitchen sink with the water running, and I thought, this is what it looks like when a man has been told something by his father and is waiting to see if it's true. This is not Garrett angry. This is Garrett in the early stages of a case he's been handed and hasn't decided whether to take. I was watching this happen across 3 weeks, and I did not confront it directly because I was trying to understand what I was looking at before I responded to it. That was the thing about Garrett. He operated below the level where anything could be called out cleanly. There was nothing I could point to. There was only the accumulation of small temperatures. I thought about the account. Not defensively. I had no reason to be defensive about money I had earned and organized and never spent in any way that affected our household, but practically. I thought about what the account meant to me and what it had meant in the moment I opened it. It had been a Tuesday afternoon 14 months ago. Liam was napping. I was in my office with a deposit notification from a client on my phone, and I had looked at the amount, not large, a few $100s, the kind of money that gets absorbed into a joint account without leaving a mark, and I had thought, I want this to be somewhere I can see it. I want this particular money that I worked for in the particular way I work, to be in a column with my name at the top. I had not thought about it beyond that. It had not felt like preparation. It had felt like clarity. But by the second week of that October I understood something that I had not understood when I opened the account, that the question of what something is not always the same as the question of what it means to the person who finds it. And Douglas Merritt, who had 40 years of practice at finding things and deciding what they meant, had found my account and decided what it meant, and he had delivered that meaning to my husband 6 weeks before I stood in the sitting room and had no idea any of it was in motion. On a Wednesday night in the third week, when Liam was asleep and Garrett was in his home office and I was at the kitchen table with my laptop and a glass of wine I was not drinking, I did something I had been considering for several days. I reached into the drawer beneath the kitchen island, the deep one, the one where we kept the household files, and I pulled out the folder marked financial/joint. I set it on the table. I opened it. Inside were the usual things: the lease agreement, the car insurance papers, bank statements from our joint account going back a year and a half, a folder within the folder for tax documents, Garrett's business insurance certificate, a copy of our wills. Documents that defined the structure of a life without describing what the life felt like to live. I took out the bank statements. Not because I was looking for anything specific. I took them out because I had spent 3 weeks feeling like I was standing in a room where the floor plan had changed and I didn't yet know which walls were load-bearing. The joint account was straightforward. Our joint expenses came out of it: rent, utilities, groceries, Liam's preschool. Garrett deposited a set amount from his firm earnings each month. I had never deposited anything into it because we had arranged it, early on, as Garrett's contribution to household expenses while my income, when I had income, was for personal spending. This had seemed at the time like a fair arrangement. Looking at it now, I could see what it actually was: an arrangement in which the only money in our joint account was his, and the account with my name on it was the one that had caused a weekend in Sausalito to unravel. I went further back. I pulled out a second folder I hadn't opened in years, the one from before Liam, the early marriage years, when I had been working full-time and we had kept things even more loosely organized. I took out the old statements and I looked at them in the kitchen light. In the first 2 years of our marriage, I had contributed substantially to our joint expenses. Not because we had agreed on a number, but because my income had been comparable to Garrett's then, and the contributions had happened organically, and I had never tracked them because tracking them had not seemed necessary. I could see now, looking at the figures, what those contributions had amounted to. The number I came to, roughly adding across 2 years of statements, was not a small number. It was the kind of number that, if someone asked you to account for your contributions to a shared life, you would want to have written down somewhere. I had never written it down anywhere. I sat with the folder open and the statements spread across the table for a long time. The kitchen was quiet in the way it was quiet at 11 o'clock on a weeknight, the particular quiet that is less the absence of sound and more the absence of anyone using the space for anything except thinking. I could hear the faint sound of Garrett's keyboard from his office down the hall, the irregular stop-and-start rhythm of someone working through something. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do that night. I picked up my phone and opened the banking app, the one for the account I'd had since college, the one I'd had before Garrett, before the marriage, before any of this. I scrolled back through the transaction history to the month before our wedding. I was looking for something specific. I had a memory of it, approximate but persistent, the kind of memory that sits in the back of your mind as something you filed away and never needed to retrieve. I found it. A wire transfer dated 14 days before we married. From my college savings account to the joint account we'd opened together in anticipation of the marriage. $11,400. Every dollar I had saved across 6 years of working, of community college in Davis and the first years at the environmental firm, liquidated and deposited into the account that would become ours. I sat with my phone in my hand and looked at that number for a long time. I had never asked for that money back. I had never thought of it as something to ask for. It had gone into the joint account the way you pour water into a river, part of the river now, undifferentiated, gone. But the transfer was there in the history, dated, sourced, signed. Documentation of something that had been entirely mine and had become entirely ours, in a single transaction, 2 weeks before I took Garrett's name. The thing about keeping records is that it is not always a strategy. Sometimes it is simply who you are. I had been organizing paperwork, keeping receipts, filing bank statements, photographing important documents since I was in my 20s, and had no one to rely on if something went wrong. It was not paranoia. It was the habit of a woman who grew up without a safety net and had never fully believed one had been installed. I put the statements back in their folder. I put the folder back in the drawer. I took a screenshot of the wire transfer and emailed it to myself with no subject line, just the image. I closed the drawer. I sat for a while longer in the kitchen quiet, and then I opened my laptop and I looked at the balance in the account Cordelia had described to the room as the one he didn't know about, and I looked at the number there, and I thought about what it was and what it wasn't, and I thought about Liam upstairs, and I thought about the drive home and Garrett's hands on the wheel and the thing he hadn't said that was louder than the thing he had. The call from Cordelia came on a Friday. I was at my desk in the small room off the kitchen that served as my office. I was in the middle of a review comment on an environmental assessment for a site in Marin, something I needed to finish by end of day, and my phone lit up with her name and I looked at it for a moment before I answered. "Hey," she said. Her voice was different from the weekend. Lighter, friendlier, the voice she used when she wanted something and was trying not to make it look that way. I just wanted to check in. How are things? Fine, I said. Things are fine. Good. A pause. Good. I'm glad. I know I know it got tense. I hope you know that wasn't anyone's intention. I know, I said. Marcus thinks I pushed too hard. He said I should have stayed out of it. He's probably right. She laughed, a short sound, self-deprecating in a practiced way. I love Garrett. And I love you, Presley. I want things to be good between you two. My voice was even. I appreciate that. He's been calling Dad a lot, she said. Garrett has. More than usual. Just so you know. I stopped typing. Okay, I said. I'm not saying that to worry you. I thought you should know. Dad has opinions. You know how he gets. Another pause. I think Dad is telling him some things that might not be, I don't know, helpful. What kinds of things? I said. She hesitated. In the hesitation I could hear her deciding how much of whatever she knew she'd been given permission to share, and how to frame the portion she was about to release as an act of loyalty to me, rather than an act of management on behalf of someone else. I think he's telling Garrett that the account is a red flag, she said. Legally. You know. Marital assets, that kind of thing. Dad knows people. He has opinions about what it means when a spouse opens. Cordelia, I said. She stopped. If Garrett has concerns about our finances, I said, he can raise them with me directly. A silence. Then, carefully, of course. Of course he can. Her voice had shifted slightly. The lightness was still there, but something underneath it had changed register. I just thought you should know what you're walking into. Thank you, I said. I'll let you go. I set the phone down on the desk. I sat for a moment with my hands in my lap. Through the window, the street outside was ordinary, the particular ordinariness of a Friday afternoon in No Valley, someone walking a dog, two people outside the coffee place on the corner, the light going gold the way it went gold in the late afternoons in October. Everything outside the window looked like it had nothing to do with anything. I picked up my phone again and I found a contact I had not used in 2 years. A woman named Joanna Ferris who had done some legal work for a colleague of mine in Davis, a family attorney, someone whose name I had put in my phone during a conversation I'd told myself at the time was just idle, just information, just the kind of thing you did when you were being sensible, not the kind of thing you did when you were preparing. I looked at her name on the screen for a long moment. Then I put the phone face down on the desk and went back to the environmental assessment, and I finished the review comments and I sent the email, and I made a note on the paper calendar I kept in the desk drawer. Not a name, not a number, just the word Friday with a small circle around it. And I sat in my office in the gold October light and I was very still and very quiet and I thought about what Douglas had said to Garrett in the 6 weeks before the weekend and what Garrett had been told and what that meant about what was already in motion. The front door opened. Garrett's key in the lock. His particular way of coming in, the door, the keys on the hook, the bag set down in the hall. Presley, he called. His voice came from the hall and it had a tone in it I hadn't heard before, not flat, not careful. Something that had been prepared. Something that had been organized on the drive home. I put the calendar back in the drawer. In here, I said. His footsteps came down the hall toward my office, and I turned in my chair to face the door, and my voice was steady and my hands were still, and I waited for what was coming. He was standing in the doorway of my office with his coat still on and his bag still over one shoulder, and the look on his face was the one I had been bracing for since Cordelia's call, not angry, not cold, but organized. Resolved. The look of a man who had rehearsed something on the drive home and was now standing in the place where the rehearsal became the thing itself. We need to talk, he said. I know, I said. He came in and sat in the chair across from my desk, the small armchair I used for calls, the one Liam sometimes climbed into and refused to vacate, and he set his bag on the floor and put his hands on his knees and looked at me. I spoke to someone, he said. A lawyer. Just to understand my options. I want to be upfront about that. My hands were flat on the desk. Okay, I said. I'm not saying I've made any decisions. I'm saying I wanted to understand the landscape before we had this conversation. He paused. Because I think this conversation is overdue. I agree with that, I said. The account, Presley. He said it like he was returning a lost item. like he was placing it between us on the desk and inviting me to claim it. I need to understand the account. Not the amount. Not the details. I need to understand why you opened it without telling me. Because I have been trying for 3 weeks to come up with a reason that isn't what it looks like and I can't. What does it look like? I said. He looked at me steadily. It looks like you were building a way out. The gold light through the window had gone copper now, the late afternoon shift that happened fast in October. I could hear the street outside, a car, someone's door, the ordinary texture of a Friday. I let a moment pass before I answered. I opened a savings account, I said, with money I earned. I didn't tell you because I wanted, for the first time in 3 years, to have something that I had built and controlled and didn't have to account for to anyone. To account for. He echoed the phrase the same way he'd echoed it in the car, carefully, like he was examining it for edges. You make it sound like I audit you. I didn't say that. But that's what you're implying. That you felt controlled. I felt, I said, choosing the word with the care it required, like the only money in our joint account was yours, and the only money with my name on it was the money I had to apologize to your family for. Something moved across his face. Not softening, more like recalibration, the expression of someone who has heard a point they expected and had already prepared a response to. Your consulting income is not a secret, he said. I've never asked you to put it in the joint account. I've never made any demand about your money. No, I said. You haven't. Then I don't understand what you're protecting yourself from. I know you don't, I said. He leaned forward slightly. What does that mean? It means I know you don't understand it, I said. And I've been trying to figure out how to explain it in a way that doesn't require you to already understand it in order to hear it. He sat back. He looked at me. Try, he said. I took a breath. When Liam was born, I said, I stopped working. We decided that together, or we talked about it together, which I thought at the time was the same thing. And what that meant practically was that the money coming into our household was entirely yours, and the money going out was for our life, and I was part of our life, but I was not in any functional way part of the financial structure of it. And that felt fine. And then it kept feeling fine, the way things feel fine until you realize that fine is just the word you're using because you're not looking directly at the thing. The thing, he said. The thing, I said, is that I spent 3 years building a life that I had no documented stake in. Every decision we made, the house we chose, the neighborhood, the preschool, all of those decisions were made on the basis of your income. I was a variable. You were the constant. He was quiet for a moment. The copper light shifted. That's not how I see it, he said. I know. I see it as our life. Jointly. As a partnership. A partnership, I said, in which one person has financial autonomy and the other one doesn't. His jaw set. You have financial autonomy. You've always had. I have a savings account with 14 months of part-time consulting income in it, I said, that you brought to your parents' house as evidence of my bad faith. The silence that followed had a different quality from the others in this conversation. It was not thoughtful. It was the silence of a man deciding whether the thing he was about to say was the thing he actually wanted to say. Then he said it. My father thinks you're positioning yourself, he said. Legally. For a divorce. I looked at him. Is he wrong? He said. 3 weeks ago, I said, he would have been completely wrong. Garrett went very still. And now? He said. Now, I said, I'm sitting in my office on a Friday evening having a conversation that started in your parents' sitting room with your sister and your father as the audience, and I'm looking at my husband who went to a lawyer before he came home to talk to me, and I am trying to figure out which version of my marriage is the real one. He stood up. He didn't move toward the door, he just stood, the way people stand when they need to change the physical arrangement of something without knowing yet what arrangement they're changing it to. I didn't go to a lawyer as an adversary, he said. I went to understand. I know. I love you, Presley. That's not in question. I know that too, I said. Then what is in question? I looked at him for a long moment. My voice stayed even. Whether love is the same thing as being on my side. He left the office without answering that. I heard him go to the kitchen, heard the sound of the refrigerator, heard him move through the house with the specific quality of someone walking through their own space and not entirely sure what to do in it. 20 minutes later, Liam woke from his nap, and the sounds of the house shifted into the ordinary machinery of the evening. Bath, dinner, the picture book Liam required before he would consider sleep a serious proposal. I did all of it. Garrett helped, and we orbited each other in the way we had orbited each other for 3 weeks, functional and precise and careful not to touch the edges of what was between us. We got Liam through his bath and his dinner and his book and his 7 requests for water and his renegotiation of the bedtime by 15 minutes and his eventual reluctant total submission to sleep, and then we were back in the ordinary rooms of the house with the evening outside the windows and nothing between us but the question I had left in the office and that neither of us had picked back up. He picked it up at 9:30. I was on the sofa with my laptop not working, the screen open to nothing in particular, and he came in from the kitchen with 2 mugs and set one on the table in front of me and sat at the other end of the sofa, and I thought for a moment that this was going to be the version of the conversation I had been hoping for, quieter, private, without the architecture of his family behind it. I talked to my dad again today, he said. Before I came home. I set the laptop aside. I know, I said. He looked at me. Cordelia called, I said. She mentioned you'd been talking to him. Something crossed his face, not anger at Cordelia, more like the adjustment of someone who has discovered the room has different acoustics than expected. What did she say? She said Douglas has been giving you advice, I said. Legal opinions. About what the account might mean in certain contexts. He wrapped both hands around his mug. He's trying to look out for me. I know he is, I said. That's what concerns me. Garrett looked at the middle distance. He thinks I've been naive, he said. About the financial setup. About what it would look like if things went badly. He thinks I haven't protected myself. Protected yourself, I said. From me. That's not how he. Garrett. My voice was quiet. Your father spent 6 weeks advising you on how to protect yourself from your wife before he ever suggested that you talk to your wife. And you took that advice seriously enough to see a lawyer before you came home tonight. I need you to hear what that is. He was quiet. He's my father, he said finally. I know, I said. And he is not on our side. He is on your side. Those are different things. He loves this family. He loves you, I said. That's not the same as loving what we built. Garrett set his mug down on the table with a careful precision that meant he was managing something that wanted to come out louder. You have never been fair to him, he said. Not in 7 years. You've decided he's the enemy since day one and you have looked for evidence ever since. That's not. You have, he said, and his voice had an edge in it now, a heat that he'd been holding back since the office. You came into this family with your guard up and it has never come down. My mother tries and you tolerate it. My sister tries and you analyze it. My father has built something significant and he has been generous to us, to me, and you have treated him like a suspect. I have been, I said carefully, exactly as warm as the room allowed. That's not true. The first time I met your father, I said, he asked me what part of California I was from, and when I said Bakersfield he said, "Oh, the Real California," and smiled, and that was the last time he asked me anything about myself. He stopped. He was making conversation. He was establishing something, I said. He does that. He establishes things. And what he established that first night was where I was from and what that meant about what I was. And everything since then has been consistent with that first conversation. You're describing a man you've decided exists, Garrett said. Not the man who actually. He told you that account was evidence I was building a legal exit, I said. Before you spoke to me. He told you that and you believed it, and you went to a lawyer, and then you came home and repeated it to my face. That's not a man making conversation. That's a man running a case. Garrett stood up again. He had a habit, I was noticing, of standing when conversations reached a pressure he didn't know how to sit with. He stood and moved toward the window and looked out at the street, and I watched his back. He told me something else, he said to the window. I waited. He said that if it came to it, legally, the account would be the least of the concerns. He paused. He said that a woman who keeps financial secrets is usually keeping other kinds. The room was very quiet. That's what he told you, I said. Yes. And you think that, I said. You think I'm keeping other kinds of secrets? He turned from the window. His face was open in a way that was almost worse than closed, because what was in it was not certainty but something more corrosive. He was asking. He was actually asking. His father had planted something and it had grown in the 3 weeks since Sausalito, and now he was standing in his own sitting room looking at his wife with a question he didn't have the courage to say out loud. "Say it," I said. "Presley. Say the thing you're actually asking," I said. "Don't make me pull it out of you." He looked at me. His voice, when it came, was low. "Are you seeing someone?" The fire wasn't burning tonight. The room was just the room, the sofa, the mugs, the street outside the window, the house quiet around Liam sleeping down the hall. I looked at my husband. "No," I said. "I am not. The account is money I earned," I said. "That is all it is. 14 months of work, routed to an account in my name because I needed something that was mine. That is the whole truth. There is no other truth." He nodded slowly. Something in him shifted, not resolution, not quite relief. More like a man who has been told the floor will hold and has not yet decided whether to test his full weight on it. "I believe you," he said. "I know," I said. "But you asked." He sat back down on the sofa, not at the far end this time, closer. He put his elbows on his knees and rubbed his face with both hands in the way he did when he was tired, genuinely tired, the exhaustion that came from a particular kind of sustained tension. "I don't know how we got here," he said. "I do," I said. He looked at me. "We got here," I said, "because when your family asked me to explain myself in their sitting room, you told me to apologize or leave. In front of all of them. And I have not been able to put that down since." He was quiet for a long time. The mug on the table in front of him had gone cold. The street outside was fully dark now, and the house was the only light in it, and he sat with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor. "I shouldn't have said it the way I said it," he said. "No," I said. "You shouldn't have. But you have to understand I was frustrated and they were your family," I said. "And I was your wife. And you chose." The words landed and he felt them land. I could see it, the way the chest changes when something hits the place it was aimed at. "That's not fair," he said. "It's accurate," I said. He looked up at me. And what came into his face then was something that had been waiting behind the organized look, behind the lawyer and the phone calls to his father and the 3 weeks of careful, something raw, something I might have reached for if the weekend in Sausalito had gone differently, if the words in the sitting room had been different. "I need you to meet me halfway," he said. "I need you to work with me. Because I am trying." His voice had lost the prepared quality. "But if you won't, if you've already decided that this family is something you need protection from, then I don't know what we're doing." I looked at him. "I need to think," I said. "Presley. I need to think," I said again. "Not tonight." He looked at me for a long moment. The rawness in his face went through something I couldn't follow and came out the other side as something harder, something that had made a decision. And then he said in a voice that was quiet and final in a way I had not heard from him before, "I talked to Dad again this afternoon. About the house. About the financial structure." He paused. "He thinks we should formalize things. Legally. A postnuptial. To clarify what's marital property and what isn't." Another pause, shorter. "He's already spoken to his attorney. There's a draft." I went still. "He had a draft drawn up," I said. He was trying to be proactive. "He had a draft drawn up," I said again, "of a legal document restructuring our marriage. Without speaking to me. Without you speaking to me first. He had that done." Garrett's jaw was set. "He's protecting his son." "He had that done, Garrett. That's what you're telling me. That is what happened." "I'm telling you because I think it's something we should consider. Together. I'm not ambushing you with it." I looked at my husband. I looked at him for a long moment, and my voice when it came was very quiet and very level, and I said, "How long has the draft existed?" He looked at the floor. "Garrett. 3 weeks," he said. "He had it drawn up after Sausalito. He wanted to wait until we'd talked. Until I'd had the conversation with you. 3 weeks. The draft had existed for 3 weeks. Since the weekend. Since the sitting room, since apologize right now or pack your bags, since the firelight and the train set and the question I hadn't answered. His father had had a document drawn up restructuring the financial terms of my marriage before Garrett had said a single word to me about it. I looked at my husband and the cold clarity I'd felt in the sitting room came back, but larger now, quieter, with more space in it. I want to see it, I said. Presley. I want to see the document, I said. If it exists, I want to see it. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said the thing that was the end of something or the beginning of it, depending on which side you were standing on. My father says that's a matter for the attorneys to handle now, he said. He says any further discussion should go through counsel. On both sides. He paused. He says that's the cleanest way forward. For everyone. He says. I looked at Garrett, at his face, at the specific, exhausted, certain, arranged quality of it, and I understood with perfect clarity that I was not in a conversation with my husband. I was in a conversation with his father. And Douglas Merritt had just told my husband to stop talking to me. I said, all right. That was all. 2 syllables, flat and even, and I let them sit in the room while Garrett looked at me with the expression of a man who had expected more argument, more heat, more of the conversation he'd prepared for, and was not sure what to do with the absence of it. All right, he repeated. If Douglas wants to route things through attorneys, I said, then that's what we'll do. Something shifted in his face. Relief, maybe, or the edge of it, and then, just behind the relief, something that looked like it might have been doubt, arriving a moment too late to stop anything. I think it's the right approach, he said. For both of us. I'm sure it is, I said. I picked up my mug from the table. It was cold. I carried it to the kitchen anyway, and I rinsed it at the sink, and I heard Garrett behind me in the sitting room, the small sounds of him gathering himself, phone, keys on the hook, the particular sequence of a man settling in for the night, and I stood at the kitchen sink with the water running over my hands and I thought about Joanna Ferris's name in my phone. I dried my hands. I went to bed. I lay in the dark and I did not sleep for a long time, and when I did sleep I slept badly, and in the morning I got up before Garrett and before Liam, and I made coffee and I sat at the kitchen table, and I called Joanna Ferris at 7:45 on a Saturday morning. She answered on the 3rd ring. I did not tell Garrett about the call. This was not, I told myself, a secret. It was an action taken in response to information received, the same way you'd see a doctor after someone told you there was a reason to be concerned about your health. Garrett had seen a lawyer. Douglas had engaged an attorney to draft a document restructuring the financial architecture of my marriage. The call I made on Saturday morning was not a secret, it was parody. Joanna Ferris had the manner of a woman who had been in rooms with people in crisis for long enough that the crisis no longer changed her temperature. She listened to what I told her without interrupting, and when I was done she asked 3 questions. How long had we been married? Were there joint assets beyond the bank account? Was my name on the lease? And then she said, come in Monday. Bring whatever financial documentation you have access to. Joint statements, your own account records, anything relating to property or shared debt. We'll start from what exists. I said I would. One more thing, she said. Don't move money. Don't close accounts. Don't change anything about your financial behavior from this point forward. Whatever the other side is building, you don't want to give them a pattern to point at. Understood, I said. I wrote down what she'd told me on the small notepad I kept beside the kitchen calendar. Not names, not amounts, just the list. Joint statements. Own records. Lease. Property. Shared debt. I folded the notepad page in half and put it in the inside pocket of the bag I used for work, the one that lived on the hook by the back door, and I went to get Liam when I heard him calling from upstairs. The weekend was surface civil in the way that weekends are civil when 2 people have agreed, without saying so, to hold everything in suspension until Monday. Garrett took Liam to the park Saturday afternoon and I used the 2 hours to go through the files again. Not the joint financial folder this time, but the one I kept in my desk drawer, the personal one, the folder I had started 2 years into my marriage because I was someone who kept records and had never stopped even after the keeping of them stopped feeling necessary. I reached into the desk drawer and took out the folder. It was thicker than I remembered. I set it on the desk surface, opened it and went through it slowly. Inside were things I had filed without the intention specifically of ever needing them. Copies of the tax returns from our first 3 years of marriage before Liam, when I had been working full-time and my income had appeared on the joint return as a substantial line. Pay stubs from the environmental firm I had left when Liam was born. A copy of the letter I'd written formally resigning, which I had filed because I filed everything, and which now, reading it, felt like a document from the life of someone I remembered but no longer was. I set the tax returns to one side. I went through the rest of the folder more carefully than I had in years. Near the middle, tucked inside a manila sleeve I'd used to store apartment documents, were 2 years of co-payment records on a health insurance policy I had carried during the early part of our marriage. A policy that had covered us both, because Garrett's firm was newer then and the group plan hadn't been worth the premium, and I had been on my employer's plan and had added him. I could see the amounts. I could see both names on the declarations page I'd kept a copy of. Another thing that had been mine, that had covered us both, that had never been accounted for in either direction. I photographed the declarations page with my phone and sent it to my personal email with a subject line that said, "Insurance for Monday." And at the back of the folder, in a manila envelope I had put there and not opened since, the paperwork from the first apartment Garrett and I had shared. Before the marriage. The lease had been in both our names and we had paid equally, and when we moved out I had received half the security deposit back by check made out to me, and I had a copy of that check and the statement showing it deposited, because I kept records. I took out the manila envelope. I unfolded it slowly, pressing the crease flat against the desk. Inside were the lease pages, the move-out statement, the check copy. And beneath those, something I had not remembered filing, the printout of the wire transfer. The one I'd found in the banking app the previous Wednesday night. $11,400. I had a physical record of it already. I had printed it out years ago and filed it, and then forgotten I had done so. It was sitting in the envelope behind the apartment lease in the same careful order in which I kept everything. I laid it flat on the desk beside the tax returns and looked at what was in front of me. I had never asked for that money back. I had never thought of it as something to ask for. It had gone into the joint account the way you pour water into a river. It was just part of the river now, undifferentiated, gone. But it was documented. The transfer was dated, sourced, and signed, and it was sitting on my desk in the October morning light, and it was documentation of something that Douglas Merritt's attorney had probably not thought to account for, because it predated the marriage and involved money that had been mine alone. I photographed each document with my phone. I put the originals back in the manila envelope, unfolded the crease as gently as I could, and placed it back in the personal folder. I put the folder back in the desk drawer. I closed the drawer. I sat for a moment with my phone in my hand, looking at the photographs. Then I opened my email and sent them to Joanna Ferris with a subject line that said "Documents for Monday," additional items, and a 3-line note explaining what each one was. I was not in that moment angry. I want to be precise about this because it is the part of the story I have had the hardest time explaining to myself afterward. I was not angry. I was not afraid. I was something that sat between those two states and resembled, more than anything else, the particular focused calm I associated with the best hours of my work, the hours when a problem clarified itself completely, when all the variables were visible and the path through them was simply a matter of methodology. I had spent 7 years learning to take up less space. And Douglas Merritt had drawn up a legal document designed to make that smallness permanent, to write it into the financial architecture of my marriage so that it would survive even if I stopped cooperating with it. I understood now why I had been keeping records all along. I was not the woman Douglas Merritt thought he was dealing with. I was the woman who had a manila envelope in the back of a desk drawer and the presence of mind to have filed the right things at the right time, years before there was any reason to think I would need them. I put my phone in my bag. I went to start dinner. Garrett and Liam came home from the park at 5, Liam muddy to the knee and entirely satisfied about it, and I ran him a bath and listened to the bath story, and the evening moved through its ordinary motions, and I was in it, and I was also, very quietly, somewhere else entirely. Somewhere with a folder on a desk and a phone full of photographs and a Monday morning appointment on Sansom Street that nobody had told me not to keep. Monday's appointment was at 10. I dropped Liam at preschool at 8:30 and took the bus across the city to Joanna's office on Sansom Street, a small suite on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like old paper and coffee and the specific neutrality of professional spaces in which people said difficult things to other people every day. Her assistant brought me water I didn't drink. I sat in the chair across from her desk and she had the documents I'd sent printed out and arranged in front of her, and she had also, I saw, printed the statements from the joint account and from my consulting account both, and she had made notes on a yellow legal pad in a handwriting so small and dense it looked like a different language. She walked me through what she saw. The post-nuptial draft, she said, which Garrett had formally sent to her office that morning, forwarded from Douglas's attorney, was aggressive. That was her word. Aggressive. It proposed to reclassify a significant portion of what would otherwise be considered marital assets as Garrett's separate property, on the basis of source of income. It proposed to limit any future claim I might make on the appreciation of the firm's value during the marriage. And it contained a clause, buried in the third section, the language dense enough that you'd have to be looking for it, that waived my right to any financial accounting of contributions made prior to the marriage. She tapped that clause with her pen. This one is the tell, she said. Whoever drafted this knew about the wire transfer. Or suspected there was something like it. They're trying to get ahead of it. I looked at the clause. The language was technical and smooth, the kind of language that looks like neutrality until you understand what it is doing, which is not neutrality at all but its exact opposite, a very precise attempt to erase a very specific thing. Can they do that? I said. They can try to include it, she said. Whether it holds depends on whether you sign it and whether you had independent counsel when you did. Which is exactly why you're sitting in this chair on a Monday morning. She leaned back. I want to talk about the tax returns. She pulled the copies I'd sent her to the top of the stack, the first 3 years of joint returns, the years when my income had been a full documented line on the return, and she placed them on the desk between us and she said, your income in years 1 through 3 of your marriage averaged out to approximately 82% of Garrett's. During those years, were you contributing proportionally to joint expenses? Yes, I said. Documented? The bank statements show it, I said. The transfer's out. And the joint account received both our direct deposits. She made a note. And then you stopped working. When Liam was born, I said. By agreement. Whose suggestion? I thought about it. It was a conversation, I said. I can't say it was one person's suggestion. We talked about it and we decided. Did you document that decision in any way? Email, text? I don't know, I said. Maybe. I'd have to look. She nodded and made another note. Look, she said. Because what I'm building here is a picture of contribution. What you brought in, what you gave up, what the household benefited from as a result of your choices. That picture matters, and the wire transfer is a significant piece of it, because it shows that your separate premarital property went into this marriage in a documented, traceable way. She looked at me. The clause in the postnuptial draft is trying to erase that. I want you to understand what that means. It means Douglas knew about it, I said. Or guessed. It means, she said, that someone on the other side did their homework. And it means we need to do ours. I said, what does our homework look like? She told me. She told me in the particular methodical way she had of moving through information, not rushing to conclusions, not framing things in ways designed to alarm or reassure, just laying out what was known and what needed to be established and in what order. I listened and I took notes on the small pad I'd brought from home, not names and numbers, just action items, banking records, firm records, insurance declarations, text thread from second year. The insurance copayments, I said. I sent you the declarations page. Does that count toward the contribution picture? She looked at the page I'd sent. Yes, she said. You carried a policy that covered both of you during a period when the firm's group plan wasn't viable. The premiums came from your account. That's a contribution. She made a note. How many years? 2, I said. Maybe 2.5. Until the firm grew enough to bring him onto a proper group plan. We'll establish the exact period from the declarations pages and the bank records, she said. She set the page aside and looked at the next item in the stack. The $8,000 transfer to the partner. You have text messages. From that week, I said. He wrote temporary transfer in the thread. Just until the quarter closes. I'll make sure it comes back to you. Those were his exact words. She wrote something down. Those messages are significant, she said. Not because the amount is large relative to everything else, but because they establish a pattern, that monies moving from your separate account into the firm sphere were understood by both of you to be traceable and recoverable, not gifts. The postnuptial draft is attempting to reframe the entire history of your separate contributions as informal, undocumented, and therefore non-recoverable. The text messages push back against that framing directly. I looked at her across the desk. Outside her window I could see a narrow strip of sky above the buildings on the next block, the pale gray of a San Francisco morning that couldn't decide whether it was going to clear or stay. I thought about the text thread I had found the previous weekend, scrolling back through the archive, typing his name, watching the years compress. I had photographed the exchange standing at my kitchen counter on a Saturday morning while Garrett and Liam were at the park, the phone held very still, 3 screenshots to get the whole thread. "I want to understand something," I said. "About the postnuptial draft. The clause that's trying to erase the premarital contributions, how did they know to put that in? How did they know there was something to erase?" Joanna looked at me steadily. "There are 2 possibilities," she said. "One is that Douglas's attorney did standard due diligence and included that waiver as a precautionary measure, covering all premarital contribution claims as a class. That's not unusual in an aggressive postnuptial. The other possibility is that Douglas knew about the wire transfer specifically and instructed his attorney to address it." "If he knew," I said, "how would he have known?" "Garrett could have told him," she said. "Or Douglas could have had someone pull the joint financial history as part of his initial preparation, before he brought the attorney in. There are ways to surface a premarital transfer if you know where to look and have access to enough of the subsequent records." She looked at me. "You said Garrett found out about your consulting account from a piece of mail." "A bank statement that came to the house," I said. "He mentioned it to Douglas. That's how this started." "Did Douglas have any access to your joint financial accounts?" "A shared login, a financial advisor who works with both of them." I thought about it. "Garrett's accountant does his taxes," I said. "He's always used the same firm Douglas uses. They've been with them for years." Joanna made a longer note this time. "That's worth knowing," she said, and did not say more than that, and I understood from the particular quality of her restraint that she had filed this information in a category I did not yet have clearance to understand. "What does our homework look like?" I said again, and this time I meant it differently. Not what is the list, but what is the scope, what are we actually doing here? She looked at me with the settled expression of a woman who has navigated these waters long enough to know the difference between a client who wants to be managed and a client who wants to understand. She had understood from the first phone call, I thought, that I was the second kind. "We are building a picture," she said, "that is more complete, more documented, and more accurate than the one the other side has been operating with. That picture already exists in your folder and in those bank statements. My job is to give it a form that a court would recognize and that Douglas Merritt's attorney cannot dismiss as informal. Your job is to let me do that and to keep living your life in a way that doesn't give anyone a pattern to point at. And get some sleep if you can manage it." I thought about Liam at preschool 2 miles away, eating his snack at a low table with the other 3-year-olds, entirely uninformed about the existence of postnuptial agreements and beneficial interests and contribution ledgers. I thought about the particular quality of his face when he was concentrating on something, the way he tucked his lower lip, the way he looked up to check if you were watching. "I can manage it," I said. It took 11 days. Joanna's paralegal went through 4 years of joint bank statements and built the contribution ledger, every deposit, every transfer, every documented expense paid from accounts in my name during the marriage. The wire transfer anchored it, but it was not the only piece. The insurance co-payments. The $8,000 firm loan. The 3 years of co-equal income contribution, documented on the joint tax returns. The years of unpaid domestic labor after Liam was born, quantified at a prevailing wage rate the paralegal calculated from 3 sources and footnoted carefully. Every number had a source. Every source had a page number. The ledger was 31 pages when it was done. Joanna's paralegal had put tabs on it, one for each category of contribution, color-coded, the kind of thorough, quiet organization that only someone very competent and slightly angry on my behalf would produce. I held it in my hands on a Thursday afternoon in Joanna's office, and I thought about how long I had been keeping records without knowing I was building this particular thing. Joanna filed the formal response to the postnuptial draft that afternoon. The response declined to sign and attach the ledger as an exhibit. She sent it to Douglas's attorney at 4 o'clock. On Thursday morning of the following week, Douglas called Garrett. I knew this because Garrett came home Thursday evening with a face I had not seen on him before, not organized, not prepared, not the arranged look of someone who has rehearsed. He came home looking like a man who had been told something he had not expected to be told, and the telling had taken something out of him. He came into the kitchen where I was making dinner and he stood in the doorway and he said, "The $8,000. I kept my attention on what was on the stove. "Yes," I said. "You kept the statement," he said. "I keep records," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Presley." His voice had lost the flatness it had carried for weeks. It had something rougher in it, something that was not yet an apology but was adjacent to the place apologies came from. "That money, I thought we'd agreed it was a gift. To the firm." "We agreed it was a temporary transfer," I said. "Those were your words. Temporary transfer." "That was," he stopped. "That was years ago. I don't remember it that way." "I have the text messages," I said. "From that week. If you'd like to read them." I had found them the previous weekend, scrolling back through the archive threads, searching the year the firm had the cash flow problem, typing his name into the search bar and watching the years compress until I found the thread and the exchange I remembered. Temporary transfer, he'd written. Just until the quarter closes. I'll make sure it comes back to you. 3 screenshots sent to Joanna that afternoon. He looked at me. The roughness in his face deepened into something I recognized now for what it was. Not the face of a man receiving bad news, but the face of a man receiving information that was reorganizing something he thought he understood. "How long have you been building this?" he said. I set down the spoon I was holding. I turned to face him. "I have been keeping records," I said, "since before we were married. Because that is what I do. I am not building anything. I am simply the person in this marriage who wrote things down." He looked at the counter. He looked at me. He looked at the counter again. "Dad is," he stopped. Started again. "Dad is saying this changes the picture. The attorney is saying the ledger complicates the postnuptial significantly." "I imagine it does," I said. "He's angry," Garrett said. And there was something in his voice when he said it, something that was almost the beginning of a distance between him and that anger, between him and his father, that I had never heard before. "I know," I said. He said. Garrett's jaw worked for a moment. He said, "You've been running a long game. Since before the marriage." He said the wire transfer was calculated. That you were protecting yourself from day one. I picked up the spoon. I turned back to the stove. My voice stayed quiet. "Your father told you to apologize right now or pack your bags," I said. "Those were his words delivered through your mouth in his sitting room. And now he's surprised that I had a bag already packed." The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of the stove. Garrett stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he said, "He's talking about escalating. Legally. He has resources, Presley. He's done this before with he knows people. He said if you push this it will cost you more than you have in that account." I stirred what was on the stove. "Then it will cost me what it costs me," I said. "That's not." He moved into the kitchen, not toward me but into the space of it, like he needed to be in the same room without knowing what to do in it. "I don't want this. I want to talk to you. I want to figure out if there is a version of this that doesn't end in a courtroom." "So do I said. "Then why?" "Because your father drew up a document designed to erase my financial history in this marriage," I said, "and had his attorney send it to mine before you and I had finished talking. And the appropriate response to that is not to do nothing." He was quiet. "I need you to do something," I said. I turned from the stove and I looked at him directly. "I need you to talk to your father and ask him to stand down. Not for me. For us. Because if Douglas is running this, there is no version of this conversation that you and I ever actually have. We will just keep having his conversation through other people's mouths." Garrett looked at me. His face went through something complicated and slow, a man pulling on a thread and feeling, for the first time, how much of the fabric it was attached to. "He won't stand down," he said. "When he decides someone is a threat, he doesn't." "I know," I said. "But I need to know if you'll ask him." The silence between us had a different quality from all the silences before it. Not cold. Not directed. Something that was genuinely open, genuinely, painfully, for the first time in weeks, a space that was not yet filled with anything. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. He looked at me. The screen said Dad. And the expression that came over his face in the moment before he answered, the expression of a man who knows exactly what the call is and answers it anyway, was the clearest thing I had seen in the entire length of this autumn. He answered it. He said, "Hey, Dad." And then he walked out of the kitchen down the hall, and I heard the front door open and close behind him, and the street sounds came in for a moment and then were cut off, and I was alone in the kitchen with the sound of the stove and the window going dark and the 31-page ledger sitting in Joanna's office on Sansom Street with every dollar I had ever put into this marriage written down in someone else's clear, professional hand. I took the pot off the heat. I reached into my work bag on the hook by the back door and I took out my phone and I found the email Joanna had sent me the previous evening, the one with the subject line FYI, firm records request, and I opened it and read it again. In the process of pulling together the contribution ledger, her paralegal had requested the financial records from Garrett's firm covering the years of our marriage. Standard procedure, Joanna had said, when establishing the value of a professional asset in a marital context. The firm had not responded to the first request. Yesterday, Joanna had sent a follow-up. What the follow-up had returned, not from the firm but from the county recorder's office, where Joanna had filed a parallel inquiry, was a document I had not known existed. It was a deed of trust. On a property in Tiburon, registered 18 months ago in Garrett's name and Douglas Merritt's name jointly, valued at $2.4 million. I had not known about the Tiburon property. Garrett had not mentioned a Tiburon property. There had been no conversation about a property in Tiburon, no disclosure on any tax return I had seen, nothing. A $2.4 million piece of real estate, held jointly by my husband and his father, registered while we were married, that I had never been told existed. I stood in the kitchen with my phone in my hand and the pot off the heat and the street outside quiet, and I looked at the deed of trust on the screen of my phone and I understood, with a precision that had no room in it for doubt, what I was looking at. I was not looking at a husband who had drifted toward his family's influence during a difficult month. I was looking at a financial architecture that had been built around me, and beneath me and without me, and the postnuptial draft had not been Douglas Merritt protecting his son from a suspicious wife. It had been Douglas Merritt protecting a $2.4 million asset from a wife who, if she ever found out about it, would have a documented, ledgered, $11,000 wire transfer anchored claim on the appreciation of her husband's marital estate. My phone buzzed. A text from Joanna, "Call me when you can. There's more." Joanna picked up on the first ring. "You saw it," she said. "I saw it," I said. "I found it this afternoon through the recorder's supplemental index. It was filed under Douglas's holding company, not under Garrett's name directly, which is why it didn't surface in the first pass. The property is a residential parcel in Tiburon. 3 bedrooms, waterfront access, registered 18 months ago. The deed lists Garrett as a 49% beneficiary interest under a family trust administered by Douglas." "He's a beneficiary," I said. "Not an owner." "The distinction is real but limited," she said. "In a marital context, a beneficial interest acquired during the marriage is potentially a marital asset, depending on how it was funded and what the trust documents say. We need the trust documents." Another pause, shorter. "The more relevant question right now is whether Garrett disclosed this on your joint tax returns." I thought about the returns I had photographed. I thought about the lines I had looked at, the figures I had seen. "I don't think so," I said. "I don't think so either," she said. "Based on what you've sent me. Which means we may be looking at an omission on a joint filing that has both your names on it." Her voice stayed measured, the way it always stayed measured, the specific professional calm of a woman who had seen all of this before in various configurations and was not surprised by any of it. "I'm not saying that to alarm you. I'm saying it because you need to understand what the other side is managing right now. This isn't just a postnuptial negotiation anymore." "No," I said. "I'm going to need Garrett's full tax disclosure history," she said. "And I'm going to need you to decide in the next few days what you want the outcome of this to look like. Because right now we have significant leverage. What we do with it is your decision." I said, "I'll call you tomorrow." "Get some sleep," she said and hung up. I put my phone in my pocket and I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, looking at the dark window above the sink. The street outside was quiet. The house was quiet. Liam was upstairs, asleep, one sock on and one somewhere in the sheets, entirely outside of this. The front door opened. Garrett came back in. I heard the door, heard his keys, heard him come down the hall. He came into the kitchen doorway and stopped when he saw my face. "What happened?" he said. "Come sit down," I said. I showed him the deed on my phone. He looked at it for a long time. Long enough that I could see him reading it twice, 3 times, the way you read something when the first reading doesn't produce the result you expected. His face went through a series of small adjustments, not guilt, not fear, something more interior than either of those. Something that looked like a man watching the floor plan of a building he thought he knew rearrange itself around him. He told me it was a family investment, he said. That he was putting it in the trust. That I wasn't involved in the purchase. I didn't put any money in. But you knew it existed, I said. He set the phone down on the table. He looked at his hands. Yes, he said. The word was quiet. It cost him something to say it. And you didn't tell me, I said. Dad said it was a trust asset. That it was separate from our finances. That there was no reason to. Garrett. My voice was even. You knew about a $2.4 million property connected to your name that you didn't disclose on our joint tax returns. That is not a technicality. That is a decision. His jaw moved. I trusted him, he said. He handles the family finances. He always has. I didn't question it because I have never had a reason to question it. I know, I said. He looked up at me. That doesn't make it better. No, I said. It doesn't. He sat at the kitchen table with his hands flat in front of him and he looked at the middle distance and I watched him do the thing I had been doing for 11 days, pull on a thread and feel the fabric move. Only for him the fabric was different. It was not the marriage he was pulling apart. It was something he had built his entire sense of the world on, a structure that had been there before I existed in his life, before the firm, before Liam, before any of it, the absolute bedrock certainty that his father was on his side. He was protecting the asset, Garrett said. Not a defense. Just understanding arriving, slow and not welcome. He was protecting the asset, I said. And the postnuptial was the instrument. If I had signed it, my right to any claim on marital estate appreciation would have been waived, including any claim I might have made on a beneficial interest that surfaced later. Garrett closed his eyes briefly. He knew, he said. He drew up the document, I said. So yes. A long silence. The stove had gone cold and the kitchen had the particular still quality of a room after a meal that was never finished. Garrett sat at the table and I stood by the counter and between us was something that was not the marriage exactly. It was the shape of all the things the marriage had been built on top of, visible now that the surface had been cleared. I need to ask you something, he said. And I need you to answer it honestly. All right, I said. Did you ever actually think about leaving? He looked at me. Not as a legal strategy. Not as documentation. Did you think about leaving us? I looked at him for a long moment. Not before Sausalito, I said. He absorbed that. And after, he said. After, I said, I thought about what staying would cost me if the terms didn't change, and I decided I wasn't willing to pay that cost anymore. Not without it being a choice I made clearly with my eyes open. And now? He said. Now, I said, I know what the terms actually are. And that's different from what I knew 3 weeks ago. He was quiet. Then, what do you need from me? I need you to call your father, I said, and tell him that you're handling your own marriage, without his attorney and without his strategy and without his architecture. I paused. And I need you to be honest with Joanna's office about the trust documents. Full disclosure. Whatever it takes to make the tax situation clean. He looked at me. If I do that, he said, he will, he stopped. He doesn't take that well. Historically. I know, I said. I know he doesn't. The kitchen was quiet. He'll say you turned me against him, Garrett said. He'll say you've been running a long game since before the wedding. He'll say the wire transfer was calculated and the records were staged and that you planned all of this. He said it not as an accusation but as a forecast, his father's voice, arriving in the room ahead of the actual call. He'll say I'm a fool for not seeing it. He may say all of that, I said. What do you say? Garrett looked at me. He looked at me for a long time, with the specific quality of a man who is deciding something that has been available to decide for longer than he's admitted to himself. I say, he said slowly, that I told my wife to apologize or get out. In my parents' sitting room. In front of my family. And she didn't do either one. And it turned out she was right not to. The third time those words came into a room between us, they landed differently. Not as an ultimatum, not as a weapon. as something he was holding up to the light and seeing clearly for the first time, the shape of it, the weight of it, what it had cost. My voice when I answered was quiet. That's what I say too. Garrett called Douglas the next morning. I was not in the room for the call. I took Liam to preschool and I walked back slowly, taking the long way through the park, watching the fog come off the bay the way it had come off the bay that morning in Sausalito, low and slow and patient, and I thought about what it meant to be the kind of woman who kept records. Whether that was a sad thing or a careful thing or simply the thing I was, the way some people are the kind who remember every word of every argument and some people are the kind who can't remember what they had for breakfast. I had been keeping records since before I had any reason to think I would need them. That was the truth of it. It was not strategy. It was the habit of a woman who grew up without a safety net and had never fully believed one had been installed. A woman who put herself through college on her own, who saved $11,000 over 6 years by accounting for every dollar in and every dollar out, who filed the receipt from the apartment security deposit and the declaration page from the insurance policy and the text message that said temporary transfer, just until the quarter closes, not because she was building a case but because she had learned, early and at some cost, that the world did not keep records on your behalf. When I got home, Garrett was in the kitchen. He looked tired. Not the performance tired of the past 3 weeks, the managed exhaustion of someone managing a position. Actually tired, the tiredness of someone who has put down something heavy and is still feeling the weight of it in his hands, even now that it's on the floor. He said what you said he would say, he told me. I know, I said. He said you've been positioning since the wire transfer. He said the ledger was a fabrication. Garrett poured a mug of coffee and set it on the counter in front of me without me asking. He said I was, he paused. He used the word naive. Several times. What did you say? I said that I was handling my own marriage. He looked at his own mug. He didn't take that well. No, I said. He hung up. A beat. He's called twice since. I haven't answered. I picked up the mug. It was the right temperature, he had timed it, I realized, to when I'd be back. A small thing. The kind of small thing that either matters or it doesn't, and which you cannot know the meaning of until much later. I talked to his attorney this morning too, Garrett said. Before the call to Dad. I told them we were withdrawing from the postnuptial process and that all further communication should go through Joanna's office. He looked at me. That's going to cost us. In terms of the relationship. I know, I said. I don't know how to have a father who is also someone I can't trust, he said. It came out simply, without drama, which made it worse. I don't know what that looks like going forward. I don't have a model for it. I know, I said. I don't know either. He built everything, Garrett said, and his voice had something in it I hadn't heard before, not loyalty exactly, but the specific bewilderment of a person discovering that a thing they never questioned has a seam in it. The firm wouldn't exist without his introductions in the early years. The neighborhood we're in is because he knew someone. He stopped. Every good thing in my professional life has his fingerprint on it somewhere. And I don't know what to do with that now. I don't know either, I said. I think that's the honest answer. I don't think there's a clean version of this. He looked at me. Are you glad? He said. That it happened the way it did. That you found the deed. I thought about the question. I thought about standing at the kitchen counter with my phone and the pot off the heat and the particular quality of cold that comes not from temperature, but from the arrival of information that changes the shape of what you thought you were living. I'm not glad it happened, I said. I'm glad I know. He nodded slowly as though this distinction made sense to him, and I thought it probably did. He was, after all, the kind of man who spent his professional life on the difference between a thing you could see and a thing that was simply there. We stood in the kitchen with our coffee and the fog outside the window and Liam's cereal bowl still on the table from breakfast, and we did not fix anything in that moment because nothing in that moment was fixed. But we were standing in the same room on the same side of the same problem, for the first time since October had started, and that was not nothing. Joanna's office spent the following 6 weeks in formal correspondence with Douglas's attorney. What emerged from those 6 weeks was not dramatic, the way that legal processes are rarely dramatic in the way that the events that cause them are dramatic. It was slow and documented and precise. The trust documents were disclosed, reluctantly and only after Joanna filed a formal discovery request. The Tiburon property was confirmed as a marital asset subject to disclosure. The omission from the joint tax returns was addressed through an amended filing that Garrett's accountant handled, with Joanna's office reviewing the draft before submission. Douglas did not communicate with me directly during this period. He communicated through his attorney, and his attorney communicated through Joanna, and the communication had the temperature of a man who was managing a situation he had not expected to need managing. I noticed, during this period, that I slept better than I had in October. I didn't understand this at first. There was more at stake now, more in motion, more that could go wrong in formal and documented ways. But the quality of the tension had changed. In October I had been standing in a fog, aware that something was wrong but unable to name the shape of it, unable to hold it at a distance that allowed for clear sight. Now I could see it. The architecture was visible. The seams were exposed. There is something that the visible problem offers that the invisible one cannot, which is the possibility of response, not the feeling of response, not the performance of it, but the actual thing, methodical and precise. I finished the Marin environmental assessment in the second week. I sent the report to the client on a Friday afternoon and received a response by Monday asking if I'd be available for a follow-on project. I said yes. The work was the same work it had always been: review, analysis, the careful accounting of what was there before and what would remain after, and it sat in the part of my days that was mine and had always been mine, and I was glad to have it there. Cordelia called once. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that said she wanted to understand what was happening and that she hoped we could talk. I did not call back. The message sat in my voicemail for 2 days and then I deleted it, not out of anger but out of the knowledge that there was nothing in that conversation that would cost less than it gave back. Renata sent a card. A physical card mailed to the house, with her handwriting on the front in the careful script she used for formal correspondence. Inside it said, "Presley, I hope you and Liam are well. I hope things find their way." Nothing else. No mention of Garrett, no mention of Douglas, no ask embedded in the kindness. I put it on the kitchen windowsill and looked at it for a week, and then I put it in the drawer where I kept things I wasn't ready to sort. I thought about the particular kind of woman Renata was, a woman who had spent 40 years in rooms managed by Douglas Merritt, who had perfected a specific form of gentleness that was also a form of survival, who had maintained the garden with such precision because it was, as I had thought 7 years ago, the one domain in her life she could fully govern. I did not hate her. I was not sure I even blamed her. I put her card in the drawer and I let it sit there. The settlement, such as it was, took the form of a formal acknowledgement. No divorce. No separation. Those had been possibilities I had held in my mind like objects I was examining in both hands, testing the weight of them, real, worth knowing the weight of, not something I owed anyone a performance of certainty about. What happened instead was slower and less clean than either ending. Garrett and I went to a counselor. Her name was Dr. Sadie Wren, and she had an office near Dolores Park with a waiting room that had too many plants in it and a box of tissues on every surface, and we sat across from each other in her office for an hour every Thursday for 3 months, and we said things we had not said in 7 years of marriage. The first session we mostly described the facts of what had happened to a third person who was trying to understand the shape of it, and I watched Garrett's face as he told it, and I watched my own understanding of the shape shift as I heard it told. The second session we said some things that had been waiting to be said for longer than October, things from the early years, from before Liam, from the way we had arranged our finances and our lives without ever sitting down and asking the questions that needed asking. He said things about feeling managed, about the consulting account feeling like a withdrawal not just of money but of trust. I said things about feeling like a dependent in a household I'd helped build, about the specific exhaustion of being the person who kept track of everything, the appointments, the preschool schedule, the dental forms, the household documents, without any of that keeping being visible as a contribution. Dr. Wren did not tell us what to do with any of it. She reflected it back in forms we could look at without flinching and let us look. By the third month we were having, in that room, something closer to the conversation we should have been having on the drive back from Sausalito. It was not easy and it was not resolved, and there were sessions after which I drove home in silence feeling scraped out and too tired to cook dinner. But the conversation was real, and real was what I had wanted. There was a session in December that I keep returning to. Garrett said something I had been waiting 7 years to hear him say out loud. He said, "I think I always assumed that because I wasn't cruel to you, I was being fair to you. And I don't think those are the same thing." Dr. Wren did not react to this with the soft affirmations I had half expected from a counselor's office. she said simply. Can you say more about that? And Garrett sat with it for a moment, and then he said, the financial arrangement. The way we set it up early on. I told myself it was practical, that it made sense given the income difference, that you'd agreed to it. But what I didn't ask was what it cost you to agree. What it meant to you to not have your name on anything significant. I sat across from him in the small office with the too many plants and I did not speak. I let him finish. That was the restraint the room had taught me, not the silence of having nothing to say, but the silence of knowing that some things need room to land before you respond to them. He looked at me. And I said, I know you knew I was unhappy sometimes. What I needed you to know was why. That was the conversation. Not all at once, not resolved in that hour. But it was the one that the others had been building toward, and it was real. Douglas's acknowledgement was signed in February, and I was already a different person than the one who had stood in a sitting room in Sausalito refusing to apologize. The Tiburon property was formally disclosed and assessed. Garrett's beneficial interest was established at a documented value. It did not transfer to me, that was not what I had wanted, and it would have required a legal fight that would have cost more in years and money and Liam's sense of his own family than the asset was worth to me. What I wanted and what Joanna delivered was acknowledgement. A documented accounting of what existed, what had been withheld, and what my contribution to the marital estate had been across 7 years. The contribution ledger became a permanent record. Joanna filed it. The wire transfer, the insurance payments, the $8,000 loan, the 3 years of co-equal income contribution, the years of unpaid domestic labor during Liam's early years, all of it, documented, numbered, acknowledged in writing by both parties and both attorneys. Douglas signed the acknowledgement through his attorney on a Tuesday in February. He did not apologize. I had not expected him to. What I had expected was exactly what happened. A signature on a document that cost him something, made by a man who had never in his life been made to account for what he'd taken and had now, once in a small and enforceable way, been made to. His attorney submitted the signed document through Joanna's office without a cover note. Just the document. Just the signature at the bottom with the date. I thought, when Joanna called to tell me it was done, that I would feel something larger than what I felt. What I felt was quieter than that. Something like the feeling of setting a mug down carefully, not the end of anything, not the beginning of anything, just the particular small completion of a thing properly placed. I am telling you this from our apartment in Portland. We moved in March, Garrett, Liam and I, and the portable crib and the wooden train set and the box of financial files I now kept in a locked drawer in my office because I had not stopped keeping records and I did not intend to. We moved because No Valley had become a place where every street corner had a conversation attached to it, and because Garrett had been offered a partnership in a smaller firm with a studio in the Pearl District, and because Liam said airplane for the first time about the clouds above the moving truck and seemed unbothered by all of it in the complete way that 3-year-olds are unbothered by geography. The apartment has west-facing windows. In the evenings the light comes in low and gold the way the light did in No Valley, and Liam runs on the floor with his trains. He has expanded the set since Portland, a loop now and a bridge and a station he constructed with absolute opinions about where the trees should go, and Garrett sketches at the table, sometimes at his desk in the room that doubles as our office. And I work at my own desk on a project that is larger than anything I've taken on since Liam was born. An environmental impact review for a development on the Oregon coast, a stretch of headland above Cannon Beach where someone wants to build and the questions about what's there and what would remain are genuinely difficult and genuinely worth the months it is taking to answer them. It is the kind of work that takes months, the kind that matters, the kind I had been doing in pieces around Liam's schedule for long enough that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to have a project that was the size of its own full weight. We're not fixed. I want to be clear about that, the way I want to be clear about most things now. We are not the marriage we were in September and we will not be, and I have stopped thinking of that as a loss. What we are is something that knows its own ledger now. We know what we put in and we know what we almost lost and we know the shape of the thing that nearly undid us, which is not Douglas Merritt exactly, though he is part of it. The shape of the thing is closer to this. 2 people who loved each other and did not look directly at the structure they were building that love on top of, until the structure was examined by someone who wanted to use it against them. We looked at it. That is what we did. We looked at it in the worst possible way in a sitting room in Sausalito with a fire burning and a 3-year-old's train set on the floor, but we looked at it. I don't think looking at something is the same as fixing it. I think it is the thing that has to happen before fixing becomes possible, and that without it all the other work, the counselor's office, the amended filings, the ledger, the signed acknowledgement, would have been architecture laid over a foundation neither of us understood. We understood it now. That was what October had cost us, and it was also, I thought, what October had given us. The price and the thing purchased were the same thing. I have not decided yet whether that is how it always works or whether we got lucky. I am still deciding. Some things have changed in ways I did not expect. I deposit my consulting income into the joint account now, not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted to and because the wanting was clean, which meant something different than it would have meant in September. Garrett shows me the firm's quarterly numbers, something he never used to do, not because Joanna required it but because he understood, somewhere in the 3 months in Dr. Wren's office, that keeping the picture to himself had been its own form of arranging the furniture while I was sleeping. Small things. The kind of small things that are either nothing or everything, and you don't know which until years later when you look back and see whether they held. Douglas has not contacted us since the acknowledgement was signed. Garrett texted him in April on his birthday, a brief message that received a brief reply. There is a shape forming in the space where the relationship used to be, not a hole exactly, more like a room that's been emptied out and not yet refurnished, where you can walk through and remember what used to be there. Garrett is in that room more than I am. I watch him be in it and I do not tell him how long it takes to empty a room you've been in your whole life and stop expecting it to look the way it used to. Cordelia sent a text in March. Just heard you moved. Hope Portland's good. I wrote back, it is, thanks. I did not ask about Marcus, I did not suggest a visit. The text sat in the thread for a week and then the thread went quiet and I let it stay quiet. This is what it looks like when you stop reaching across a distance that was always partly your own. You don't slam the door. You just stop expecting it to open on its own. Liam's birthday is in April. He will be 4. He has opinions now about everything. About which cup is the right cup, about whether sandwiches should be cut in triangles or rectangles, about the specific and non-negotiable order of the bedtime books. He has also developed opinions about what constitutes an acceptable park. The one near our apartment in the Pearl District passes on most counts: acceptable swings, acceptable slide, satisfactory proximity to the coffee cart where I sometimes stop, but is missing, in his assessment, a tunnel. He has noted this deficiency twice. I have noted it in the paper calendar I keep in the desk drawer, under the heading Things Liam will want me to remember, which is a category I started in the first year of his life and have never stopped adding to. He is unbothered and certain and entirely himself, and I watch him and I think that whatever it cost to get here, he does not carry any of it, and that is the only accounting that matters to me more than all the others. There are a few things I know now that I didn't know in October. 1. The money you put into a shared life is always traceable, even when no one has given you a reason to trace it. Keep your records. Not because you're planning to leave. Because you are a person who was somewhere before you were here, and that matters. 2. The person who hands you an ultimatum has already chosen which side of the door they're standing on. So have you the moment you choose not to apologize for something that wasn't wrong. And the person who stayed silent in that room while the ultimatum was delivered has also chosen, whether they know it yet or not. Every person in a room like that makes a choice. Not choosing is still a choice. 3. A family that asks you to make yourself smaller in order to be welcome is not asking you to be welcome. It is asking you to disappear. And the distance between those two things is exactly the distance between a person and a document. One of them can be erased and one of them cannot. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real emotional truths many families carry. If something in it reminded you of your own family, the pressure to apologize for things that weren't wrong, the money that was never acknowledged, the room where you were the only one without an ally, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I read them. And if you want the next one, subscribe. I'll be here.